Welcome to episode 382 of We Don't Die Radio. I'm your host, Sandra Champlain, author of the international best-selling book called We Don't Die, A Skeptic's Discovery of Life After Death. And this is another video episode. So if you are listening today on your favorite podcast and you'd rather be watching, just go to YouTube and type in the search We Don't Die Radio 382. And there's an interesting story of how I met our guest today. There's an upcoming conference with our friends at IANS, which is the International Association for Near-Death Studies. It's going to be held in person and online August 31st through September 4th, 2022, I'll say that. And it's on life after death, near-death experiences, and our favorite subjects all related to that. And I was asked to be a speaker. I'm not able to attend live, but I am going to upload a video presentation. So I got a lovely email from a lovely gentleman named Darren, who is going to be the in-between for this. And on one of the emails, I just happened to click on his website, which is seekingi.com, seeking-I, as in I.com. And he's a like-minded soul. He most definitely is. He had a fear of dying at a very young age, and he's got one of those skeptical and scientific minds that we love so much. And he's done his own investigations, and now he has his own YouTube channel and his own podcast called Seeking I, and has 64 episodes as we are recording this today. So I want him to tell you in his own words. So Darren McKennedy, welcome to We Don't Die Radio.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. Well done. You got the name correct. Not many people do.
Well, yeah, it's just a new one. And I know people mispronounce my name all the time. So it's okay. Call me Sandra.
Champlain.
Yeah. That's right.
Yes, you don't know many Champlains.
I don't think there are too many of us. Anyways.
No.
Well, it's lovely to meet you.
Yeah. And you. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, that was a kind of a bolt out of the blue, your email inviting me on. I do, of course, know of the We Don't Die Radio specifically. I've seen it around, and it's very much a privilege to be asked to come on. I see you read my... Did you see the bio on the website? No, that's the new website, isn't it? You wouldn't have seen that yet. So I appreciate you having a look at the videos.
Yeah, well, it's really nice to meet like-minded people, and anyone, when I ever hear like scientific mind and looking for evidence and all that kind of stuff, I mean that's my background as well, and it all started with a fear of dying. So with that, your story better than anyone. We have all the time in the world, so if you kind of want to take us back to where it all began for you, and let us know where you're located as well.
Well, I'm in the UK, as most people probably can tell from the accent. Everyone thinks I sound posh. I'm not whatsoever. I come from a place called Essex, which most people will know it from The Only Way is Essex, which is a show over here, which is very unrealistic to most of us. But I'm now in kind of the Cambridge area around there, well-known city, but I'm a little bit out of that. But yeah, I mean, it all began... I was bullied quite severely in primary school, or what you'd call elementary school. And I was always quite sensitive, but that kind of sparked, I believe, I'm not sure, but I believe that the bullying kind of sparked the whole series of events. It affected me so badly I ended up with shingles at 10 years old, because it absolutely wrecked my immune system, the stress of it. And that kind of started bringing the whole anxiety situation up slightly. You could tell something was wrong. And that was when I was 10. And then when I was 12, in what we call secondary school, what you would call, I suppose, middle school, probably, I experienced a traumatic event, which was, not many people would consider it traumatic, but for me, being so sensitive, I fainted in a science lesson because I didn't realise I was squeamish. And then we did something in biology about the circulatory system. The teacher said something and bang, I was out. Went down, hit my head, woke up with everybody staring around me and some of them giggling, and then that wasn't very nice. And that really kind of was the spark to the ignition that started the whole anxiety disorder. I was always very nervous and very quiet, as I said, but the disorder actually began with that trigger. Over time, it mainly focused on health anxiety, and it still does, which means, a stomachache would be, in my mind, a stomach tumor or something very, very serious, which made me feel even worse. And if anyone knows what anxiety does, it's a huge spiral that makes you feel like you're dying. And I felt like I was dying every day of my life. Again, not just being afraid of dying, but feeling physically like I was dying. It was horrible. I couldn't get out of bed a lot of the time. I certainly didn't want to. When I was 16, I experienced a emotional breakdown, and the depression kind of began. Well, it began before that. I suppose it naturally came off of the anxiety. The two are often related. But at 16, I had a big down spiral of it, and I became suicidal because feeling like I was dying every day. I didn't want to live like that for the next 70, 80 years. And I thought, well, what other choice do I have? You know, I can either take my own life, which I knew I couldn't do because of the fear of death, the fear of never existing again. And at this point, that's what I believed. I was always very scientifically minded even back then. And I thought, it's clear, brain creates consciousness. Once you die, that's it. Why would it be anything else? So I knew I wouldn't have taken my own life because I didn't want to have that experience or that non-experience. It terrified me. So I just kind of had to suffer through it, and eventually it kind of resolved itself on the uptick. I tried going to various counsellors and psychotherapists. They did very little to help me. A little bit here and there, but ultimately it was not particularly helpful. I forced myself back into school for the last 2 years at 17 and 18. During the time I was at school, I was in the learning support area, which was in a big building. It was in the dungeon area of the building. We were taken away, completely forgotten about, not supported really at all. My grades went from A's down to D's. Got back in for the last 2 years and managed to come out with A pluses at the end of it and B's at the lowest. So I managed to do that pretty much on my own with the support of mum and dad, but nobody else, unfortunately. And since then, it's just been kind of a roller coaster up and down of the depression and the anxiety. It's just the way it goes. It's on a cycle. But nowadays, having been at the lowest of the low, you can begin to recognize the illusion behind the depression, and it doesn't affect you quite so badly. You know, I won't pretend I don't get suicidal now and then, or suicidal tendencies now and then. I do, but nowadays I can recognize them and not let them affect me too much. And that'll, of course, I hope, get better the more times it happens. Experience is the big teacher. But during that time, when I was low with the anxiety and the depression, that's when I really began looking at subjects relating to death, because I was so terrified of it that I thought, if there's any chance whatsoever that there's something more to it, it's worth knowing about. Because I'd heard about near-death experiences, was the first thing I believe I heard about, because that was what was popular at the time. And it was all the fluffy clouds going through the tunnel and seeing the deceased relatives and all that. And I was thinking, it's clearly all just in the brain. It must be, because when you die, your brain is dying. You can release chemicals. Your electrical activity will be all over the place. You can't take stories of dying brains seriously, because they're in such a state. But when I started looking into it, the distinct similarities were interesting, but again, I thought everybody has the same kind of brain. You'd expect that to be the case. And then I came across veridical perception, and I thought, hang on, this shouldn't happen. Because it shouldn't be that when your brain is in a state where maybe subjectively you could create all these erratic, hallucinogenic kind of chemicals and all these weird situations, but you shouldn't be able to hear things that are going on in another room and see things that are going on in another city and then come back and report it and have it corroborated by your doctors who are around. And you especially shouldn't be able to do that when your brain is flat or flatlined on the EEG. You shouldn't be aware, let alone be able to see things that you shouldn't be able to see. You shouldn't be able to know about people who have died who you didn't know were dead at the time and nobody knew were dead at the time. You shouldn't be able to have contact with deceased people who tell you about something hidden somewhere that nobody knew about and then go back and find it. That shouldn't happen with brain chemicals and electrical activity. So I started looking more into veridical perception just online. I'd ask things in chat rooms for links to things, and I usually got responses saying it's all nonsense, it's all just faulty memory and things like that. But as I started looking a bit more into it, I started finding other phenomena such as terminal lucidity and out of body perception and things like that, where the evidence if we were to take it that these genuinely happened, which I had no reason to doubt, if these genuinely happened, they all kind of pointed to one direction, which was that there's something more to consciousness than we currently understand. I mean, you take into context the complexity of the universe and the amount that we understand versus we don't understand, it seems stupid to assume that we know anything about us, our own brain, our own consciousness and how it works. But back then, you believe what you're taught, you believe what is in the popular culture and the popular scientific understanding, which is reasonable. But when you start diving into phenomenal activity or phenomenal experiences, you begin to think this shouldn't happen under this model. So maybe there's something more. In 2018, I started the Seeking Eye project, which was effectively, it was just a way of, but it started off connecting people together to talk about these things. I'd hire out the local village halls and the local kind of recreation centres around to get people in to just talk about these things, and nobody ever showed up for any of them. So in the end, I decided I'll take this online. I started a little blog and started writing about some of the some of the research I did. Not many people were interested, so I thought, well, let's try YouTube then. So I started a YouTube channel where I talk about some of these things and try and get hold of people to interview. The first person I interviewed was somebody who I'd actually gone to one of the groups locally, not my own, but one of them locally, who were talking about Reiki. And I found a woman called Christine, who was hosting the group. And I thought, I wonder, I don't know what Reiki is. I've never heard of it. So let's see if she'll be interested in coming on and asking about it. And I might as well record it in the meantime. So that was the first interview I did with Christine. And then I thought, well, this is good. People responded well to it. So do I dare reach out to some more people who are more well known, maybe who've written books on near-death experiences and other phenomena? So I reached out to Peter Panagore. And he got back to me. And that was surprising. But we talked about his near-death experience. He was the first kind of near-death interview I did. And then after I got the confidence of having someone actually respond, who was well known, I thought I'll just shoot out emails left and right and see what happens. And most of them came back very, glad to come on for free, which surprised me, because I was under the impression that, most people who are writing about near-death experiences are doing it for the money because they're writing books, they're getting into the popular culture. It surprised me that they were so willing to come on. And after talking to these people, you realise that's definitely not the case. That's not why they're doing it at all. And then from then, I started the podcast. I've started a various series of videos under different subjects and different layouts. And as you say, so far, 64 episodes of the podcast, various other videos of other areas of research, and I share it all for free as far as I can online. I only ever charge for things when I have to pay for someone to come on, or I have to pay for website online tools or hosting and things like that, Zoom or whatever. But as much as I can, it's all completely free. I don't think I've ever charged as of yet, which I think is important, because the more this information gets out, the more growth it can sustain in the scientific community. So that's really kind of up to now where I am.
Wow, is what I can say. Oh my goodness. Yeah, that's kind of how I got my start too. And my show, We Don't Die Radio, is free also. No commercials, just talk. And I found, when I researched so many people who have had near-death experiences, one of the main themes they come back with is being of service. And so I haven't met anybody who wanted me to pay them for anything. Even some of the biggest people, like Eben Alexander and others, it took a while before he had the time, but once he did, it's just another opportunity to share and make a difference. So I will, and those of you who are watching right now, you'll see in the description a link to Darren's podcast and the YouTube channel. So go subscribe if you like me in this conversation.
Currently on 999 subscribers today, so that will be interesting. Almost hitting that first 4 figures.
Let's do it. Let's do it together. And you mentioned, I don't remember the term you said for those experiences that can't be the brain shutting down. What's the term you called it? Yes, veridical perception.
Yeah, term coined by Jan Holden.
Yes, it was a great term, and I love Jan. There was, I think, 2 or 3 months ago, a report that came out from a group of scientists that said that near-death experience cannot be the brain shutting down. Now, they didn't say it's definitely life after death, but they said it couldn't be that because of all those things that you mentioned.
Well, I mean, it could be the brain shutting down. However, that would entail that there's a nature of the brain that's probably would have to be paranormal anyway. So, I mean, if it is the brain shutting down, I would suggest it's more likely that the brain is limiting the experience. So when it's shutting down, it's allowing for more natural experience to come through and more natural abilities to come through, which would be argued by the psychedelic effects as well that lowers brain activity.
Yes. Could you give us some of those stories? Because you gave me goosebumps when you were talking about that world of things that we shouldn't be able to know from either from your interviews or people that see things that they shouldn't see or know things that they shouldn't know. You have any of those stories?
The most famous, generally, that people will probably know is Pam Reynolds. Do you know of Pam Reynolds? So, Pam Reynolds experienced an aneurysm in her brain, a big aneurysm, I believe. Probably going to be getting some of these things wrong because it's not really a one I've delved deeply into, but I have discussed it quite a bit. So I know the basics. And effectively, she had to undergo, she was a music artist, a musical artist, a musician. And she had to undergo a full body, it was called hypothermic cardiac arrest. So her body had to be lowered in temperature to around, I can't remember the exact, but within the 20 degrees Celsius, so they could drain all the blood out of her body so they could work on this aneurysm without worrying about it causing, permanent damage. So they had to cool the body down, drain all the blood, stop the heart, of course, with no blood, well, very little blood in there. The heart working would have just been problematic. So they did that. They put her under a state called burst suppression, which is effectively the brain is flatlined, and that doesn't mean the brain isn't really working. It means the cortical activity, the main part of the brain that is believed to make us human, is effectively not working at all, and all that's left is the brainstem, which is the regulates breathing, heart rate, reflex experiences, things like that, survival instincts. And under burst suppression, what they did is they put 2 molded earphones, one in each ear, and played in one really fast continuous clicks and in the other white noise, each at 100 decibels, which is the same as standing next to someone with a jackhammer in each ear. And why they did that is because as the brain was shut down to the level of the brainstem, to make sure she was still functioning to some degree, they would monitor the brainstem's reflexes to these sounds to make sure she was still okay. But burst suppression is effectively far, 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 far lower a level of consciousness than general anesthesia, so she wasn't aware, during this state. And she, while in that state, she came out of her body. Now, most people contest that, or most people report that this was while her heart was stopped. It wasn't. Her heart wasn't stopped at this time, but she was under burst suppression, which means if she was conscious, it would have been 1 in a billion trillion, chance that she could have been conscious at that state. And she certainly shouldn't have been, is what the Dr. Spetzler, who was the head surgeon, reported. She reported coming out of her body and, of course, looking around and seeing what was going on. And she accurately reported 3 things. She reported the bone saw that was being used to open her skull. She reported it as it was like an electric toothbrush kind of thing, and it was a long, thin electric toothbrush with a saw blade on the top of it, effectively. And I believe she got the model of it correct. I might be making that up, but I'm sure I read something that she did. Regardless, she was able to describe the details of what it looked like. Some argue that if she was still conscious somehow, or she was recording input, she could have kind of got the sound of the bzzz on the bone and felt it and assumed, well, it must be kind of this, like a dental drill sort of thing. Possibly, ignoring the fact she was under burst suppression at the time. The second thing she reported was the doctor saying that the artery in her left or right, I think it was left leg, was too small to get was it the catheter in? I can't remember. So that was the second thing that she got correct, and that was certainly while her body was lowered to the temperature and she was under burst suppression. And a third thing that she reported was hearing Hotel California playing in in the operating theatre at the time. Now, Gerald Verley, who's a anaesthesiologist, a very good anaesthesiologist, who's been looking for the more sceptical argument against the Pam Reynolds case, has argued that because the main thing you would question is, okay, so she heard Hotel California, that was definitely correct, that was playing, and she definitely heard the doctors talking about her leg, that was definitely the case, and she was definitely under burst suppression at that time, according to the general procedure of hypothermic cardiac arrest that was used. How would she have heard that, assuming she was in her body at the time, which means the sounds would have come to her ears? She reported hearing these. She never reported hearing any clicks or any white noise playing at 100 decibels in each ear. Now, Gerald Verley argues that he did a test where you could put these in your ear, playing 100 decibels. I'm guessing these were normal headphones, not moulded surgical earphones. But he put them in his ears and he said, I could hear what was going on around me. Faintly, but I could hear it and I could discern what was being said. Fair enough. However, he wasn't under burst suppression, first of all, where the EEG was flat. Second of all, Pam reported hearing these, but didn't report hearing the clicks. Now, if you had these in your ears and you were somehow hearing through these clicks, you wouldn't not hear the clicks. You'd hear them kind of very faintly over the clicks. She said, I didn't hear any sounds other than what was being said. Now, to me, the only really logical way I can explain this is that she was somehow perceiving sound outside of her body without the use of her ears, which were having the clicks and the white noise at 100. Bear in mind, 100 decibels is pretty loud. So we don't know, of course, how it's possible that she was receiving audible stimuli without ears, but that's kind of the only way I can fathom that it could have possibly happened. So that's the Pam Reynolds case, and that's a very well-known one, which is why I kind of went into more detail about it, because it's often kind of misquoted, some parts of it. Another less well-known case, and a much quicker case, is one that Jan Holden told me about. And again, the details kind of elude me, but generally, the general idea was someone who was, I believe, under cardiac arrest or under very deep anesthesia came out of their body during an operation and wandered non-physically through the hospital, through the walls, didn't have to use doors, through the walls into another operating theatre where she or he saw some doctors with an amputated leg, and they put this amputated leg in a yellow bag, disposable yellow or yellow disposal bag, and put that aside somewhere. They came back and described exactly, word for word, what they saw, and it was completely accurate. It was verified that the bag was yellow. It was this leg that they saw, and it was happening kind of at the same time as the operation. It was happening a few wards down. She explained, she described exactly where it was, what happened. Well, all while being, and I can't remember if it was under very deep general anaesthesia or whether it was during cardiac arrest. I believe it was anaesthesia, but I'm not 100% sure. I'm sure that the case is written up somewhere. I'm not sure where, because Jan told me about it. I've spoken to a few people about that subject, or about that particular case on my channel, A Skeptic. I asked him what he thought about that case, because that was interesting. And the explanation he came up with was that it would be reasonable to assume that someone who was passing the ward at the time was talking about what they'd done and how they'd done it, because it's in a hospital setting. Fair enough. I don't know. I mean, we can't validate whether that happened or not, because we weren't there. You could reasonably assume that. However, if this is more, kind of if the procedure is as clear as it is for amputated limbs, you can imagine it's happened quite a few times. So would it be conversation worthy between nurses walking past other wards, and they'd have to walk past that particular ward at that particular time? It's I don't know. I mean, we can speculate, but we weren't there. So there are several cases like that do have explanations in the physical sense, but to me, a lot of them are a stretch, especially when taking evidence from other phenomena like evidential mediumship and remote viewing and past life memories, all that point to consciousness not necessarily being created by the brain, that I think it's much more parsimonious to assume that there's something about consciousness we don't know, which to me seems ridiculous to think that we know everything about it.
It's funny. Have you seen any of on television, the new pictures coming out from the Webb camera that's out in outer space? It's 100 miles, 150,000 or million kilometers out there in outer space, taking pictures of this never-ending universe, and it's capturing pictures from around the time of the Big Bang, right? Billions of years old. Things that we will never be able to investigate or even comprehend. And I don't want to say all of ours, but the Sandra, before I got interested in this, very opinionated, I knew it all, but it's like, we don't.
I think what in the universe we can understand constitutes, and I get so many different figures, and every time I've looked at this, every website has a different figure, and every conversation has a different figure. It's something like 5% of the universe we understand. It's varied from like 0.05% to something like 20% in between there. Even so, so that would mean at the max, 80% of the universe is undiscovered, the nature of it. And there's just more phenomena coming out and more things being discovered every day that you have to question based on correlations, which is consciousness and the brain correlated. You have an experience, we see that this lights up in the brain. Based on correlations alone, we can't discern a causational relationship. And we have more and more experiences coming out that just seem to say that this correlation may not be a causal one. But for some reason in the Western society, it is taken as a previously understood truth that the brain creates consciousness based on correlation, which it may be, but we can't, I don't think, reasonably conclude that now with these experiences that are coming out, especially the veridical perception, Pekindarian experiences, which about Pekindarian experiences. It's when, I briefly mentioned it earlier, it's where somebody receives information about someone who has died. Maybe they're in a near-death experience and they see someone who's died, and they don't know, nobody knows that they were dead at the time, and they come back, and then maybe the next day, or even, I'll tell you about one case that I think it was Jan again, told me about. Someone came out of their body during a near-death experience, saw, I think it was their sister, who was she was at university at the time, so she was very young, and she asked her, the person that was having the near-death experience, and I hope I'm not conflating, kind of mixing two cases up. I might be, but the point remains. She came to the near-death experiencer, who was her brother or sister, and said, tell mum I'm sorry about the red car, or about her car. So they came back, and he said, I saw Evelyn, while I was out of body. So she said, I'm sorry about the car. And of course they thought, doesn't really make much difference because Evelyn's at university, so I don't know why you saw her. I think it was the same day, a few hours later, or maybe a few minutes later even, they got a call from the police saying Evelyn's been in a car crash, and I'm sorry, she's gone, she's passed. And that was, as I say, pretty much exactly the same time this person had the out-of-body experience and saw her is when it took place. And of course, she said, tell mum I'm sorry about the car. I've wrecked it, or something like that. And of course, she died in the car crash. And that's an example of something that is often seen as anecdotal, but I would consider more a case study, because it is third party verified by the parents, the doctors who were there at the time to witness the call and the report from the near-death experience. So that sort of thing, that's a Pekindarian experience.
I've not heard that expression, but I know what it is you're talking about. I've spoken to plenty of people who've had near-death experiences that did not know that someone died, but yet they saw them. And then also there's so much research on with hospice and people just before they pass away. Someone's there to greet them or take them home. And so many times they're loved ones that they didn't know had passed, because family members, the people are already on their deathbed. Last thing they're going to say is, hey, your brother died, something like that. But they're right there to greet them. And that's fascinating.
It is. There are also cases of people who see brothers and sisters who they never knew they had, and later it turns out, when they tell their parents or their mothers specifically, their mothers will say, I had, you were a twin of two, and the other one was stillborn, and I never told you because I didn't want that on you. But and things like that, just little things like that you question, and it's difficult to really verify all of the stories because a lot of them are subjective and there's no way of really validating that they took place. But there's enough that have been validated to no longer really need to doubt the authenticity of some of these experiences.
Yes, and not everyone who's had a near-death experience has a book or is out in the public. I was just speaking the other day, when you look at a YouTube video and you look at some of the comments, and whether it's somebody speaking just moments before they pass and seeing someone, or a near-death experience, there's a little secret. If you go into some of the comments, the viewers write in their own experience many of the times. And there are so many just from regular people, and they have the most beautiful things that they witnessed. Their dogs and cats were there to greet them, their parents or grandparents looking in their 30s, and they are as vivid and real. And then when they do come back, they are more clear than any memory they've had, even if they had it when they were 3 years old. It is vivid. And
it's certainly a species-wide phenomena, irregardless of your background, your belief, your color, your gender, your upbringing, the amount of money you have. It doesn't matter. Which a lot of people seem to try to fit near-death experiences into a particular religion, especially when they use them as arguments. However, I see it more as a scientific question than a religious one, because it is so widespread amongst the entire human species that it's clearly a part of nature, of our nature, irrespective of beliefs or mindset, that has as of yet been discovered, and it's, in my opinion, a scientific question to discover that. However, the science that we currently have, the methods that we currently have, which focus on the material nature of existence, which is important, but I think it's missing that aspect that will inevitably answer the questions that we have. Especially, it won't until it starts acknowledging that these experiences do happen and are as of yet inexplicable. Yeah.
And seeking eye, Darren, it's not just near-death experiences. You talk to all kinds of people. Do you want to kind of talk about some of the different topics or people that you're looking?
So seeking eye, a lot of people introduce me as a near-death researcher. I'm not. It's just that so many people, near-death experiences are the most popular phenomena out there, and to many people the most evidential. And so when I talk to people or get requests for people to come on my show, it's usually about near-death experiences. But no, my main area of focus is the possibilities of life after death, which came about because of my fear of death. Near-death experiences are a big part of that, especially with my work with IANDS, who are, of course, the International Association of Near-Death Studies. But I've spoken to several people, and I mentioned the first interview I did was actually on Reiki, which is energy healing, allegedly. Something I never believed in. I went to the lady to have a session because I just thought, I'm interested in it, let's try it. And she offered it for free, which was very nice of her. So I went, and I must say, the heat that came out of her hands were unbelievable. It's a very unnatural amount of heat, unless she had like hidden hair dryers or something on her hands, and that was a lot of heat. And I thought that was interesting. Didn't really do much for my mental situation or my physical situation at the time. Not that there was much wrong with me, but I didn't notice much of a difference. But that heat was enough to make me think something's going on here that's not particularly natural, if you know what I mean. So she was the first interview I did, and then from there the other subjects I focus on is pretty much anything related to the nature of consciousness and possibilities of life after death. So mediumship. I've spoken to Suzanne Giesemann, who's a well-known medium, someone who I went to for a mediumship reading who was very, very good, called Marie, who's not far up the road from me, actually. Who else on mediumship? There was a few others, but also out-of-body experiences. That is willful out-of-body experiences, or astral projection, some people call it. I've spoken to a few practitioners on that, because that can include veridical perception as well without the near-death situation. Psi phenomena. I've spoken to Dr. Stanley Krippner, among others, for remote viewing and telepathy and things like that, and the research done for that. What else? Terminal lucidity or paradoxical lucidity. Michael Nahm. You know about paradoxical lucidity? I'll go back to that in a minute. And then, if you remind me, I'll forget. And then past life memories with Dr. Jim Matlock. Past life memories in children, very interesting and very strong evidence if you consider it more than anecdotes, which they are, but most people ignore that. Pet experiences, meetings with pets and communication with pets. That was Karen Anderson, who wrote the book The Amazing Afterlife of Pets, or something like that it's called. I can't remember, it was a long time ago. But me and Mum actually co-hosted that one, because that was not long after we lost Ty and Omi, my two little schnauzers. We lost them, they were 2 years apart in age, but we lost them both on the same day from two different things. And that was, Christ, I've never known grief like that before. And people will say, I mean, you know, I was posting on Facebook about, you know, the feelings I was having. I'm always very open, and I find it helpful to talk to people about things, which not enough people do for depression, unfortunately. And I was talking to them about, you know, how much I miss them, and I was getting comments like, well, just be grateful, you know, you didn't lose a child, you know, or something like that. But to me, love is love. You know, there's no difference between whether you lose a child or a pet if the love is the same. And exactly. So there's that as well. Pet communications, not something I know a lot about, and not really something we can validate. So I don't really particularly look at that much for Seeking Eye, but more as a personal thing. I look at that quite a bit. And I'm sure I've missed some phenomena that I've looked at and spoken about. I suppose other philosophies of mind as well: idealism, panpsychism, physicalism, illusionism, which don't make sense to me, and things like that. Just everything around that kind of subject of consciousness and the possibility of life after physical death.
Yeah, I took a look at your episodes, and we only have a few guests in common. So if you're interested, check out Seeking Eye podcast. So I had to remind you about paradoxical lucidity.
Paradoxical lucidity, right. It was originally called terminal lucidity. It's been recently renamed, I think, or generally looked at more as paradoxical lucidity, because it is paradoxical. You'll know about it, but you probably just haven't heard the term. So, during brain degenerative diseases like Alzheimer's or dementia, it's often the case, or not often the case, it's quite rare, but it does occur more often than it should, that sometimes months, but more commonly days or hours before someone passes through these diseases. And you know, with Alzheimer's and dementia, that people will experience complete memory loss. They won't know who's talking to them, they don't know where they are, who they are, and that's usually the case up until they die. And it's a horrible thing to go through, more so as the loved one than the person, because going to see your mother and them not knowing who you are is not a very nice thing. But it sometimes happens, and as I say, more often than it should, that hours, days or months at the longest before they die, often minutes or hours, suddenly full lucidity will return, inexplicably, for no reason. And people will recognise who they're talking to, and they'll know where they are. They have a nice conversation about the past and you know, the possible futures of their children or whatever else before they pass away. And anatomically speaking, it's completely unknown how that can possibly take place from a physical point of view, because these diseases literally eat the brain away. The neuronal connections get lost. And of course, we associate memory with neuronal connections. And of course, once those connections are broken, that memory is gone. So how that can possibly take place physically is completely unknown. There's hypotheses around it, but we can't really, they are, to me, very reaching. Again, Dr. Gerald Verley, when I mentioned it to him, talks about pH levels causing these sort of things. And I don't know enough about that. I'm not an anesthesiologist or anything, but it's still very much of a stretch considering what we believe memory to be. And of course, others hypothesize that it's the disconnection from the limiting effects of the physical brain as consciousness separates from it, impending death, which it could be. We don't know. And again, it comes down to what is the correlation between mind and brain, which ultimately you come across the hard problem of consciousness, which is a whole other subject. How can non-physical matter create consciousness, which most people assume, but never really think much about how difficult that would be to evidence. So terminal lucidity is a very strong evidence to me that the mind is not necessarily created, at least in full, by the physical brain, because otherwise that should not happen by everything we understand about neurology.
Absolutely. I agree with you. Now, I know when I wake up every morning, I typically forget that I'm the Sandra Champlain that's researched all this afterlife thing. And I think it's by design of our human nature that we play the game of being a human and experience the highs and lows, et cetera, and so forth. Doing this show, talking to great guests like yourself, keeps me exactly where I need to be, open to all possibilities. I know you've had a background of depression and still battling it. How does it make a difference to you when you interview someone or you find something new to investigate?
It depends on the current state of my depression. If I'm in a low, it may kind of boost me up a little bit, but then not for very long, and I'll start to doubt again. But again, I've had these lows so many times now that I can recognize it as an illusion, a temporary illusion that will work itself out once the swing low has come back up. But generally, talking to people about near-death experiences when I'm kind of at a stable level as I am now, it just offers you that hope that there is a reason for being here. And it's often argued, and it's something I can't understand, that it's the finality of life that gives it its meaning, because we're only here for a short amount of time, and that adds the meaning. To me, I can see why people believe that, but I can only imagine it's because they haven't really thought deeply about what that implies. Because if we're here once and then gone forever, it doesn't matter if you're Mother Teresa or Hitler, because ultimately, if material is all there is, and it follows the natural laws as we know them, in a few billion, probably longer years, the universe itself and every piece of matter within it will no longer exist. All life that's ever existed will no longer exist forever. So what's the meaning there? So, you say, well, the meaning is to make life better for the next generation. Fine, but they're going to die as well. And then everything they do for every other generation, they're also going to die. And, is it really fair to bring a next generation into the world if ultimately they're going to experience some, positives of life? There are a lot of positives, but also a lot of negatives, including the dying process itself, just to never exist again at the end of it. So to me, the finality of life can add some short-term meaning to life, but ultimately it renders life really a bit of a joke. Because ultimately you're here for no reason to experience pain, happiness, and then you're gone. So I could wake up and murder 10 million people, or I could wake up and help 10 million people. It doesn't matter. The universe doesn't care, because it's all going to end. And to me, that just doesn't make sense. I mean, from a logical... And of course, the universe doesn't have to make sense to exist. But the thing is, now that we have these experiences of near-death experiences, and we have the empirical basis of them in veridical perception and experience during flat brain and things like that, we now have data that, if looked at openly, without the preconceived dogmas, I suppose, of materialistic philosophy, not science, but philosophy, then all of a sudden meaning comes back, because now there's a reason for us to experience happiness and pain, and that meaning is to develop and to evolve, and not evolve from a Darwinian sense. Well, I suppose in a Darwinian sense, but in a non-physical Darwinian sense, in a spiritual Darwinian sense, so that we evolve spiritually to become more knowledgeable, more experienced, because we are the universe experiencing itself in a physical form to know itself better, or something like that. And it's, I mean, my philosophy of why life exists is all I haven't got a clue why we exist, but there's so many different theories none of which are correct because the universe is so complex, we can only really grasp at straws. We haven't got a clue. At least those of us that are alive don't have a clue. And just that knowledge that, or that belief that there is a meaning to in some description, there is a meaning to us being here, just makes life a little bit more bearable, I suppose, a little bit more worth living.
I agree. Absolutely. And when you add to it the different people on the different topics around the afterlife, the mediumship and so many of the other sciences and people recording audios and pictures and people in the afterlife, put it all together and it equals one thing to me. We go on. We don't know exactly our purpose here, but we can start out with being of service, loving others. Failure is a good thing, opportunity to learn and grow.
And I suppose another thing about the idea that the finality of life gives it its meaning. I think if you ask any near-death experiencer who comes back with 99% of the time conviction that what they experienced is real and that they are going to continue after death, you talk to those, they will tell you that they have found more meaning in life knowing that they continue. And that their life is far more enjoyable as a result of that near-death experience and that knowledge than it was before. So to me, I would argue that from that point of view, it's the meaning behind life that adds meaning to life, if you know what I mean.
I do. And if people can get that without having a near-death experience by listening to a show. And Darren, you have no idea who's listening or watching right now. And the words that you have to say could be just the thing that they needed to hear. So thank you. I know your journey hasn't been an easy one. And as human beings, it never is. But there are these gems that you get to collect and then you get to share with other people. And that's what you're doing. And your tribe will find you. It's really amazing being out there in cyber world and YouTube and iTunes and all that. And the right people will come and you'll make a difference.
Indeed.
Let's talk a little bit about the conference coming up. You know more details than I, because you are intimately doing the audio and video and all kinds of things related to it. But can we talk a little bit about it? Because I would love if our friends could either attend in person or online. It's going to be a great conference.
I don't know much about the layout and the content of it. All I know is the people that are going to be pre-recording. That's really all I know, because all I've got from my hands is the names and the email addresses and can you please pre-record these people. So I don't know much beyond that. But I believe it's the end of August, early September. And if it's anything like the previous conferences, which I'm sure it is, it'll be a variety of keynote speakers, panels, which I know it is because I've recorded a couple panels, and I suppose discussions talking about near-death related phenomena, as well as some of the other phenomena that all point to the meaning of life, the continuation of consciousness after death, and the implications of this research while we're still alive. And they've done one every year. The last few years has had to be virtual, online, because of COVID, the whole COVID situation. But now it's in person in Salt Lake City.
Yes, absolutely.
So
I was at their last live one in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, a couple years ago before COVID hit. And I can tell everyone, it's just a wonderful conference. They really take care of you. I mean, there are so many different rooms going on and different speakers. You can follow what you're interested in. And like I said, the whole thing's being recorded. And if you're at home, you can enjoy it a little differently than being there in person, but you can enjoy all the same things. You just don't get to give hugs and shake hands with the people that are with you. But they have so many speakers on near-death experiences and science and medicine and mediumship and different things, all connected with life after death. It's really a great thing. So here's some details. Now, we are recording this in 2022. So the conference is August 31st through September 4th. You can find out more about it at iands.org, which is IANDS.org. And it's called Timeless Oneness, the luminous message of near-death experiences and related spiritual experiences. I've talked to enough people that have attended that it's life-changing. It really is. I mean, you can't be part of that for so many days and not really get that there's so much more to life than meets the eye and so much more to us than we know. So Darren, any closing words or any bits of inspiration, or how do we get in touch with you? All those good things, even though I have a link in the description here. But
well, the best place to get hold of me and to find all my work conglomerated into one place is, as you say, the website, seeking-i.com. And I'm currently working on the new website where everything will all be on that site, because at the moment it's just a splash page that links you to various different locations. But as I say, I'm working on the new one, which will have it all in one website. So that's where the best place to get hold of me. Any imparting words of wisdom? I would say for those who are experiencing anxiety and depression, first of all, the most important thing to do is to tell someone about it, because I believe that the majority of suicides and things like that come as a result of depression, especially, comes because of the feeling of being helpless, of having no one there to be able to help you, because people believe that no one can help them. That's part of the illusion, and it's so important. And I have a friend who never told anyone about having depression. And he only told me about it because he'd seen that I was in a similar situation. And I said to him, have you told your parents? No. Tell your parents. And he was suicidal at the time, and he told his parents, and he was able to get the help that he needed from them. Even just having someone, even just the knowledge that someone knows about it is enough to kind of keep you on track. And so I would say that's kind of, if you're suffering with depression, make sure somebody knows, because then if nobody knows, no one can begin to help you. In terms of looking at the near-death experience and other phenomena, come at it with an open mind, and come at it realizing that if you believe it's all impossible or it's all just an illusion, then acknowledge the fact, or realize the fact, I suppose, to begin with, that everything we understand about the brain and consciousness is based on assumptions that aren't evidenced outside of correlations. So if you believe that the brain is created, or that consciousness is created by the brain, first of all, that's an assumption. And I say, based on nothing more than correlations of consciousness and brain activity. But there are multiple ways those correlations can be interpreted. And if you're open to the data, to look at it as data, not as a philosophical position, but as data, you'll find that generally there's no reason to think that there's more to, there's no reason not to think that there's more to consciousness than we currently understand, and that it's not necessarily a question of religion or philosophy, but one of science, because it is a species-wide phenomena, a life-wide phenomena. It doesn't matter if you're human or dog or cat or rabbit or flea, probably. People have experienced them coming to them in an afterlife. And to me, as we are simply animals of some variety, there's no reason to assume that these experiences are not species-wide, and that there is a meaning to every piece of life that exists on the planet. And that we're all part of this dance called life, that ultimately we won't understand why until the time's right. But, life can be painful, very painful, but it's in those pains that we get the best lessons and the most permanent lessons of our life. You can learn a lot from having a positive experience, but pain will teach you a hell of a lot more about what's important in life and what should be strived for than any positive experience ever can. So don't take negative experiences as punishments or unfair occurrences. They can be, like losing my 2 dogs on the same day. It's unfair, but if you look at them as lessons as opposed to punishments, and it's difficult, especially if you've been brought up with in an Orthodox Christian or religious background that will tell you that you were born in sin and you deserve to be punished. First of all, don't believe that. I wouldn't. I mean, you can do. I don't believe that, and I think it's harmful to believe that. But if you look at negative experiences not as punishments but as lessons, you can then use them to develop your own experience, your own happiness, your own contentment, to ultimately determine what is important in life, what should be strived for, and what is helpful in your life, I suppose.
Darren, there's a lot of gold in what you just said. Something you want to replay this interview, make sure you replay the end. I agree with you.
But, don't take my word for it. I'm 26. I haven't lived full life yet, so there's a hell of a lot of things I don't know. But I suppose my experience with depression and being at the very bottom, where everything that's unimportant was stripped away, kind of gave me that perspective of maybe someone who's a bit older than me. But I've still got a long way to go. You
do. But you've learned a lot of things that many of us haven't. So, I mean, it doesn't matter your age. Every experience is valid and is important. And you were able to shed light on some things that no other guest has yet in this show. So I really appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Loved my time. Very enjoyable.
Oh, very. I really appreciate it. And for our listener or our viewer, thank you. We know your time is precious and you could be doing a lot of different things, but you were here with us for this past hour. So I really want to thank you. Our home base is WeDon'tDie.com. There's so much going on. We were talking a little bit about depression and also just mentioning grief. Anyone who has lost a loved one, even a furry, 4-legged one, you can experience very, very deep grief. The more we love, the more it hurts. Chapter 10 of my book, We Don't Die, is dedicated towards grief. And I think it's the most important chapter, even though we all want to know about the afterlife. If you want a free copy of my book, that WeDon'tDie.com, just go to the store page, scroll down, you'll find my audio book. Use coupon code FREE, and you can either listen to it chapter by chapter, or there's a PDF copy that you can read. It's so interesting to see and learn what happens in our brain at some of those dark moments and what's autopilot, automatic, and to realize that some of these are out of your control, but yet if you realize they're happening, it's not you. It can really be very, very empowering. So that's my gift to you. We also have a lot of things going on. We offer a free Sunday gathering, which has, it's an inspirational service is what it is. Really a great one, very empowering. But at the end, there's a medium demonstration. So people in our online community from all over the world get reconnected with their loved ones. And even if you don't get one of those contacts, you know that these people are still around, and you too will be around long after the body dies. So in closing, my name is Sandra Champlain, and always my pleasure to be your host on We Don't Die Radio. I do believe that life is an education for the soul, and that our lives here on earth are important. And so from one of the amazing words of Darren is that the toughest times really can give us the most clarity of life, the most soul growth, the more opportunities to help someone else who may be going through it. So don't discount them. Anyways, I want to thank you for listening or for watching, and we'll see you again soon. Bye.